Hi, this is PG of PG's Lumacy. In this tutorial, we will be making Keroppi from the Sanrio characters series, and it will be made on an extended loom. For the bands, you will be needing white, lime green, red, and black. I will be using pony beads for some of the features, black pony beads for the eyes, and red pony beads for the blush spot on Keroppi's face. The pony beads come in packs like this from the craft store. And to string the beads with rubber bands, we will be using a piece of floss that is reinforced on one end. It is a kind of floss that is used for dental bridges and braces. You'll be needing toothpicks to set aside the pieces that need to be made beforehand. It would be good to have a fine crochet hook and a pair of tweezers for the fine details of this project. But if you don't have these, you will still be able to complete the project. We will be using an extended loom for this project, and this is how I put together my extended loom. It will be 5 pin bars wide, and make sure that the arrows are pointing downwards or pointing towards you. Of course, you will need your hook, and I am using the metal hook that came from the upgrade kit. But you could always use the plastic hook that came with your Rainbow Loom kit. Let's get started by making the pieces that need to be prepared beforehand. And one of those pieces would be the eye piece. And I'm using a mini pony bead, and we need to string our pony bead with 2 white bands. And so I insert the floss into the bead, and then I get my bands onto the floss. I reinsert the end of the floss into the bead, and it forms a loop that pulls the band into the bead. And we will be needing 2 of this eye piece. Another piece that we need to make would be the blush spot on Keroppi's face. And again, we insert our floss into the bead. And this time we are only using a single lime green band. We get it onto the floss, reinsert the floss into the bead, and we get this piece. We also need 2 of this blush spot. We also need to make the arm pieces before working on the main figure. And to do that, we place 2 lime green bands starting on this 4th from the bottom pin. 1, 2, 3, 4. Starting from this pin, we place our double lime green bands. And then we place another 2 lime green bands on the next pins. And to replicate the webbed hands on Keroppi, we are going to use double looped bands. And there are 2 ways of making double loop bands. One is to place a single band on 2 pins and then twist on one end and loop it back. Okay, and notice that I placed my band diagonally from the center pin to this bottom pin on the right. Another way of making a double loop band would be to twist a band to form a figure 8, fold it to itself, and that forms the double loops, and then place on the pins. And this second band is placed on these 2 bottom pins. We will place another band on these 2 pins. We will cap these double loop bands with single bands, and we will loop the band 4 times on the pin. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Let's do that for the other 2 pins. Let us loop these bands, go into the capping band, grab the double loop band underneath, and loop to the forward pin. Then loop the double bands. Grab a toothpick to secure the end loops, and then pull this entire piece off the loom. And when you're having a hard time pulling it off the loom, don't force the bands to be pulled off the loom. Use the hook to pry the bands off the pin. Okay, you don't want your bands being stretched too much, so that's why we're doing that. You will notice that the capping bands are not stretched evenly. So we have to even out the stretching on the loops, and to do that we use our fine crochet hook. We insert it into all the loops, and then just turn or spin the band like so until the stretching on the loops is evened out. Okay, you will have a neater piece when you do that. Okay, place all the loops on the hook, and then spin it like so. So you will have a neater piece. And you will need 2 of this arm piece. We are now ready to work on the main figure. And to start off, let us make the eye pieces. So unless otherwise specified, we will be using double bands for each placement. Take note of the color that we will be using for each step. So the first one will be white bands, double white bands on this top corner pins, and they're placed horizontally. Next, let us place 2 bands on these top pins. Okay, and for these pins we will be placing the eyepiece with the bead that we prepared earlier. Okay, and then we will place another double bands next to it. Then we will place 2 white bands diagonally from this center pin to the pin on the right. We will lay out the bands for the eye on this side, and we will mirror what we did on this side. With the eye pieces in place, let us now work on the face area or the head area. We will be using lime green bands, and like I said, unless otherwise specified, we will be using double bands for each placement. So the first one will be placed horizontally from this center pin to this pin on the right side. And we will do that again on the other side. Then we'll place another horizontal band on this right side and on the other side as well. Now for these pins, let us place a single lime green band. And then grab the piece that you made for the blush spot, the one with the red bead, and place it with the single band that you place on this side. So it's still double bands, but one of the bands has a red bead. Let us do that on the other side as well. A single band, and then the band with the red bead. And we will fill these pins with double lime green bands. Now, let us place double green bands diagonally from this pin to this pin on the right. And let us do that on the other side as well. Now, let's grab black bands, and I'm using single bands for this placement. I go from this center pin to this pin on the right. And I do that again on the other side, again from this center pin to this pin on the left. Okay, this will form the mouth for Keroppi. Don't forget to do this step so that you don't have to make the mouthpiece separately when you're finishing the project. Now let us fill these pins with double lime green bands. Okay. Notice that I'm pushing down on my bands so that I will have room for the other bands that I will also be placing. Next, again from this center pin, let us place two lime green bands, and they're placed horizontally from the center pin to this pin on the right side. And let's do that on the other side as well. Let us now work on the main body, which is actually the shirt that Keroppi is wearing. Let's push down on these bands because we will be adding another layer on these pins. So grab two red bands and place them again from this center pin to this pin on the right. And let's do that on the other side as well. Okay, then let us add a row of white double bands on these pins, and we will only be placing them on the middle three pins. Let us add red double bands to these bands that are in place. And to the sides, we will add double red bands that are placed diagonally from this pin on the left to this pin. Let's do that on the other side as well. Now, let us place bands on these pins, and this time we are placing bands on all of these pairs. And then let us place red double bands on all of these pairs. Then, starting from this center pin, let us add a red band. Or maybe let's change this to white. Let us add white bands on these pins. Okay. That's to go with the alternating pattern of red and white. Okay. Let's add this white double bands on this side. Okay, let's do that again on the other side, starting from the center. And the side. Okay, so those are the bands that we placed. Now let us work on the legs. For the legs, let's work on one of them. Let us use 3 lime green bands, and we will place them on these 2 pins. Then let us place double loop bands on these 2 pins. Twist and fold it back. Forms a double loop band. Then another double loop band on these 2 pins. And another on these 2 pins. And we will cap these end bands with single bands looped 4 times on the pin. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's do that again for these other 2 pins. And let us do that for the other leg. This is the resulting layout for the bands. Let us add our arm pieces. We will place the arm pieces on this pin, which forms the shoulder area. And let's do that for this other side as well. So pause the video and compare your layout with the one on the screen. Let us loop the bands starting with the leg pieces. So for the legs, you will start with the capping bands, all 3 of these capping bands. Start with this one. You might want to hold on to the capping band so they don't slip off while you are looping the double loop bands. Okay, and then you might want to loosen this up a bit so it'll be easier to loop the 3 bands. Just make sure they don't slip off the pin. Okay, and then go into that pin and loop the 3 bands underneath. Let's do that again for the other leg. Now let's work on the shirt. For the shirt, starting from these pin with the bands from the leg, loop the bands on top, and in my case it would be these bands, and then loop to the side. The next one will be this band, and we loop to the side. Okay, let's work on this other side. Okay, my band broke, or it actually did not, but it slipped off the pin. When that happens, figure out where it is attached to and go into that spot and grab the band and then loop it to the pin. Okay, just so you don't have to redo the entire layout again. Okay. Now let us loop these bands. Let me show it from the side. You're grabbing these bands, now let us loop these white bands. Oh, before I forget, we need to put horizontal bands that will hold the piece together. And so I will just grab a red single band and place it on all these pins, just on this section over here. Okay. Now let us loop the white bands. Okay, let us loop the red bands. Then let us loop these white bands. You will loop these white bands over this arm piece. Okay, and you will do that on the other side as well. Then the center band. Okay. And then when you get to this section, you will only grab the red bands and not the green bands underneath. You're only looking for the red bands, and you get them from this pin and loop to the center pin. Okay. Do that on the other side. Grab the red bands and then loop to the center pin. Now, before you work on the bands for the face or the head, you have to get these bands from the shoulder off the pin. We don't want them to be looped together with the bands for the head. So carefully grab all those bands comprising the shoulder and then get them off this pin. Let's work on this other side. Okay. Be careful not to get any of the bands on this center pin, which is the neck area. We don't want any of these bands to slip off the pin. Okay, we're keeping them on this pin. So with that, we are now ready to work on the head area. So here is the looping pattern for that. Let us first work on these bands. And we're getting the band that is on top, and in my case it is this band. So I go into the red and white bands and grab these bands. Make sure you're getting both bands. Okay. Remember, this is a thick layer, so you have to go through all the red and white bands and then grab the green bands underneath and then loop to this side pin. Let's do that for this pair of bands. Okay. Before you pull them out of the pin, check to see if you're getting the right bands. It's hard to put them back once you have already pulled them out. So let's work on this center bands. And like in other projects, when you see the neat teardrop shapes that are formed, you know that you have grabbed the right bands. Now let's work on the bands for the mouth. Okay, so grab the black band. Okay, and we're supposed to loop this band to this pin, but instead we are looping it to this pin on the other side. And be careful, it's a single band being held by a thick layer. We don't want it to break. And now we grab the other black band, and likewise, instead of looping it to this pin, we loop it on the other side. That way our bands for the mouth will be crisscrossed on this section over here. Okay, now let us loop the other bands for the face, starting with this ones. Okay. Loop the one on top. And it would be these bands. And then the diagonal bands. Put that on the other side. Okay. Now, when you loop these bands, loop only one of them. Okay. And when you loop the one, that's the one with the bead, you get this black bands, and you want to get them out of the way. Okay, we grabbed it from this side and we moved it to this side so it's out of the way, and then we grab the remaining band. Okay, let's do that on this other side. We only grab one of the bands, and it's the band with the bead, and then loop it to the forward pin. Then we get the black band out of the way, and then we loop the other band. That is just so there will only be one band holding on to the mouthpiece, the black bands. And I don't want a thick layer of bands holding on to this mouthpiece. Okay, and with that, we will loop these remaining bands on the head. Okay. Now, when you get to these horizontal bands, it is very important to remember that we are looping from this center band or pin, center pin, to this pin. Okay, and we are grabbing the band that is on top, and in my case, it would be this one and not this one. Okay, so you grab it and loop to this pin. Let's do that for the other band. Okay, and then we are looping from this pin to this pin. So we grab the band underneath and loop it to this pin. Same goes for the other side. We grab this band and loop it to this pin. And now we are ready to loop the bands for the eyes. For the eyes, we are looping these bands, and then these bands, and then this pair of bands. Let's do that. Okay, grab the band that's on top. It's actually a pair of bands. Okay. And grab the next bands. And okay, and then this end of the band is looped to this corner pin. Let's do that on the other side. Okay, lastly, from this pin to this pin on the corner left. This is how the layout will look like after the bands have been looped. Pause the video and compare your work with the one on the screen. Now grab a single white band and secure these loops on this corner pin. Grab another band and secure these loops as well. We have two end loops, two sets of end loops for this design. Okay, so we have to secure both of them. And with that, we are now ready to get this piece off the loom. Once you get your project off the loom, we are actually going to use the back side of it, because that's where the design is formed. That's where the eye pieces are, the blush spots, and the mouth are formed on the back side. Okay, so stretch out your pieces. Even out the stretching on the capping bands for the legs. Okay. And using your tweezers, fine tune the design. You want to bunch up the bands for the eyes so that they will be roundish. Okay, just bunch them together, because the more you pull them, they will look longish. So we want to bunch them together. Maybe even pull out some of them so that we will achieve a roundish shape for the eyes. Okay, and you will notice that our eyes are being pulled apart like so from these bands. So to put them together, we are flipping our figure, and from the back side we are going to go into these bands and then grab the end band and get it into that spot. Okay, and then likewise we do that for the other eye. You go into these bands and grab the end band that's holding it, and then grab the two end loops and secure them with a C-clip. And then you can secure the C-clip to one of the bands on the back side. And you don't want the C-clip pulling on the bands too much, just enough to hold them in place. And so you will see that our eyes are now held together. And let's keep on fine-tuning the shape until we get a rounder shape for the eyes, and we get our desired look. For the legs, you could again turn your figure and then pull on these bands holding the leg, pull them out, and that will fold the legs so they will be at an angle, okay, pointing forward, and it will look like our figure is in a seated position. Okay, so work on that. Rounder eyes, oblong head, and there you have it. Keroppi from the Sanrio character series, made on the extended Rainbow Loom.